the laws of sacrifice, which would later be formalized in the Mosaic Law, were already being followed by Noah as part of this covenant. These laws included instructions on how to offer burnt offerings to God and how to remain pure in both body and spirit. In Genesis 12, we are introduced to Abraham when God calls him to leave his homeland and go to Canaan. But Jubilees takes us further back into Abraham's youth, adding an entirely new dimension to his story. According to Jubilees, Abraham grew up in a family steeped in idolatry. His father, Terah, worshipped false gods. This isn't mentioned in Genesis, but Jubilees paints a vivid picture of a young Abraham who rejects the pagan practices around him, choosing instead to follow the one true God. And he said, "My father, tell me, what is this idol you worship?" And Abraham saw that it was an image of stone, and Abraham burned them before the eyes of all and fled into the wilderness. Jubilees 11:16-17. While Genesis focuses on Abraham's obedience to God's call to leave his home, Jubilees portrays Abraham as a revolutionary figure, destroying the idols in his father's house and making a bold stand against the idolatry of his time. This act of spiritual rebellion sets the stage for Abraham's later role as the father of the chosen people who would reject pagan practices and follow the laws of God. One of the most striking differences between Genesis and the Book of Jubilees is the idea that Abraham followed divine laws long before Moses was ever born. In Genesis, there's no mention of Abraham being given laws other than the covenant of circumcision in Genesis 17. However, in Jubilees, Abraham is presented as someone who already observed the Sabbath, made sacrifices, and followed other laws that are typically associated with Moses. According to Jubilees, these laws were not invented during the time of Moses. They were passed down from the angels to the patriarchs, beginning with Adam. Abraham received these commandments from angels, and he was expected to follow them as part of his covenant relationship with God. And he was taught by the angels concerning the things written in the tablets of heaven. Jubilees 12:25. Unlike Genesis, where Abraham's actions are seen as part of his personal faith journey, Jubilees presents him as someone who was part of a cosmic plan. He is guided by angels, and the laws he follows are part of a divine order that governs both heaven and earth. These laws include the Sabbath and various purity laws that Moses would later formalize. The covenant of circumcision is one of the most important moments in Abraham's story. In Genesis 17, God tells Abraham to circumcise himself and all the males in his household as a sign of the covenant. But Jubilees goes even further, revealing that this was not just a symbolic act. It was part of a cosmic law written on the heavenly tablets. According to Jubilees, circumcision wasn't just a sign for Abraham's descendants. It was a divine law that had been in existence since the creation of the world. This covenant was inscribed on the heavenly tablets, which are seen as God's blueprint for creation, containing all the laws that govern both angels and humans. And this law is for all the generations forever, and there is no circumcision of the days and no passing over one day out of the 8 days, for it is an eternal ordinance ordained and written on the heavenly tablets. Jubilees 15:25. In Genesis, the focus is on Abraham's obedience to God's command. But Jubilees portrays this act as part of a much larger divine order. Circumcision is not just a physical sign, it's a way of aligning oneself with the cosmic laws that govern the universe. The story of the binding of Isaac, known as the Akedah, is one of the most powerful moments in Genesis, Genesis 22 verses 1-19, where God tests Abraham's faith by asking him to sacrifice his son Isaac. Jubilees retells this story but with some extra layers. In Jubilees, the test is not just between Abraham and God, it's also a part of a larger spiritual warfare. According to Jubilees, the angel Mastema, a figure often associated with Satan, is the one who suggests this test to God, hoping that Abraham will fail. Mastema represents the forces of evil, constantly seeking to undermine the righteous. The Book of Jubilees adds that angels intervened during the binding, and God allowed the test to show that Abraham's faith was greater than the temptations of evil. "And I stood before him and before the prince of Mastema, and the Lord said, Command him not to lay his hand on the lad nor to do anything to him, for I have shown that he fears the Lord." Jubilees 18:10. This story in Jubilees introduces a whole new level of spiritual significance. It's not just a test of Abraham's obedience, it's part of the cosmic battle between good and evil. Mastema tries to lead Abraham into failure, but God's intervention shows that faithfulness will always triumph over evil. In Genesis, the story focuses on Abraham's personal test, but in Jubilees, it's part of a larger spiritual narrative that involves angelic forces and the struggle between good and evil. In Genesis 25 verse 23, we're told that before Jacob and Esau were even born, God revealed to their mother, Rebekah, that the two brothers would become the heads of two nations and that the older, Esau, would serve the younger, Jacob. Jubilees expands on this prophecy, emphasizing that this wasn't just a family feud, it was part of a cosmic design in which Jacob was always meant to inherit the blessing and continue the line of righteousness that started with Abraham. Jubilees adds a layer of predestination, revealing that Jacob was chosen from birth to carry on the covenant, while Esau was destined to stray from God's plan. The book even notes that Isaac and Rebekah were given divine knowledge about Esau's rebellious nature and his future descendants' opposition to Israel. And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations shall be divided from your womb, and 1 nation shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. Jubilees 19:13. Genesis reference. Genesis 25 verse 23, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. 1 people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. In Genesis, we see this struggle unfold through Jacob's cunning and Esau's impulsiveness. But Jubilees explains that Jacob was always meant to inherit the birthright and that his actions, although deceptive, were part of fulfilling God's divine plan. A divine plan. One of the key differences in Jubilees is the portrayal of Esau as more than just a brother who loses his birthright. Jubilees emphasizes that Esau represents a line of rebellion against God's chosen people. His descendants are portrayed as a nation that will rise in opposition to Israel, fulfilling the prophecy that the elder will serve the younger. While Genesis mentions the hostility between Esau and Jacob after the birthright and blessing incidents, Genesis 27 verse 41, Jubilees expands on this theme, showing how Esau's descendants would become a nation that directly opposes Jacob's line, the future Israelites. This is part of the larger cosmic conflict that Jubilees often emphasizes, the struggle between righteousness, Jacob, and rebellion, Esau. And Esau took his wives and his sons and all that he had, and he went up to the hill country of Seir and lived there. And Esau became a nation, and they oppressed Jacob's descendants. Jubilees 37:1. Genesis reference. So Esau, that is Edom, settled in the hill country of Seir. Genesis 36 verse 8. Jubilees makes it clear that Esau's rebellion was not just personal but national. His descendants would become a people who would go on to have numerous conflicts with the Israelites, reflecting the spiritual battle that began with their forefathers. One of the most significant moments in Jacob's life is when he receives the blessing from his father Isaac. In Genesis, this blessing ensures that Jacob becomes the father of the 12 tribes of Israel, Genesis 27. But Jubilees goes even further, emphasizing that Jacob was given not just a blessing but also a continuation of the divine laws that had been passed down from Abraham. According to Jubilees, after Jacob receives the blessing, God and the angels reveal to him the laws that he and his descendants must follow. These include the observance of the Sabbath, purity laws, and the sacred calendar laws that would later become formalized in the Mosaic Law. Jacob is portrayed as the keeper of these laws, tasked with ensuring that his descendants, the future Israelites, follow them as part of their covenant relationship with God. And the Lord appeared to him by night and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham your father and the God of Isaac. The land whereon you are sleeping I give to you and your seed shall be as the stars of heaven. Jubilees 27:23. Genesis reference. The vision of the ladder and God's promise to Jacob. Genesis 28:1, 12-15. In Jubilees, the laws that Jacob receives are part of the cosmic order that governs both heaven and earth. This emphasis on Jacob as the inheritor of divine law elevates his role beyond just receiving a birthright. He becomes the custodian of God's eternal commandments, linking him to the heavenly tablets mentioned earlier in Jubilees. Jubilees doesn't just stop at the rivalry between Jacob and Esau. It expands this conflict into a prophetic vision of the ongoing struggle between their descendants. The book suggests that the nations that arise from Esau will continually oppose Jacob's descendants, the Israelites, throughout history. This goes beyond the personal feud between two brothers and ties into the idea of a spiritual battle between righteousness, Jacob/Israel, and rebellion, Esau/Edom. In Jubilees, this prophetic struggle is not just about territorial conflict. It's part of the greater cosmic war between the forces of good and evil. Esau's line represents nations that will become enemies of God's chosen people, and this tension continues throughout biblical history. This spiritual opposition between Israel and the descendants of Esau plays a key role in Jubilees' apocalyptic vision, linking the conflict to the end times. And Jacob and his sons came down into Egypt to Joseph, and Esau's sons remained in the land of Edom, and from that day the enmity between the nations remained. Jubilees 45:3. Genesis reference. So that day Esau started on his way back to Seir. Genesis 33 verse 16. This vision of an ongoing spiritual struggle reflects the broader themes of Jubilees, where the story of the patriarchs is part of a larger cosmic plan, one that involves not just the family of Abraham but the destinies of nations and the ultimate battle between good and evil. That's all for this video for now. If you found this information interesting, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And don't miss part 3 to know the rest of the story.